The November 19th, 2019 regular meeting of the Mentor Exempted Village Board of Education is called to order. This meeting is being held in accordance with Section 3313.15 of the Ohio Revised Code. Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Briner?
Here.
Mr. Buckley?
Here.
Ms. Jisling?
Present.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Tuttle?
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would like to welcome everyone to the November 19th, 2019 regular meeting of the Mentor Exempted Village Board of Education. Prior to this evening, each board member has received for their review and consideration the agenda and materials associated with each agenda items for the board's approval via the district's paperless Board of Education agenda system, Board Docs. The public can access the agenda through the school district's website. The agenda is available through the district website for public viewing the Sunday prior to the board meeting. Board members have the opportunity to call the superintendent and chief financial officer for information concerning agenda items and to request, if needed, additional information. There are two places on the agenda when the board entertains comments from the community. The first hearing of the public is dedicated to those who wish to address the board on agenda items only. The second hearing of the public is dedicated to those who wish to address the board on any subject, whether it is an item on the agenda or another issue. When addressing the board, please state your name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Please address your questions to the president. This meeting is being televised on a delayed basis and will be shown on Spectrum Cable, channel 1026, Mentor and channel 1025, Mentor on the Lake. This meeting is also being videotaped and will be shown on our YouTube channel, Cardinal TV, Mentor, Ohio. Please place your mobile telephones on silent mode during the meeting. Next on the agenda, motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll, Mr. Wilson.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes. Next on the agenda, hearing of the public. Agenda items only. Anyone? Nope. Next on the agenda, superintendent's report and recommendations. Mr. Porter?
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. I have the following recommendations listed under the consent agenda and recommend approval of items 5A1 through 5A6.
So moved.
Second.
Yes. Yes. Please call the roll, Mr. Wilson.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President and members of the board, I would like to invite Mr. Casella and Mr. Buckley to the podium tonight to recognize the outstanding achievement of our cross-country athletes.
Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Porter, and Mr. Wilson, it's with great pleasure that I introduce and recognize members of our state qualifying cross-country teams. The cross-country teams had another fine season. The boys team finishing team runner-up in the Greater Cleveland Conference, runner-up at the district meet, and misqualifying as a team to the states by 1 point. The girls team finished fourth in the Greater Cleveland Conference and were district runners-up. The team finished sixth at the regional meet and advanced to this year's state meet. If I could have head coach Bill Dennison join me up here, please. Athletes, as I bring you up, be recognized by the board and stay standing up front until everybody's had an opportunity to be recognized. So first I'd like to bring up our boys state qualifier, Nick Kozlowski. Would you come on up, Nick? Nick qualified to the state meet for the third straight year. He was a three-time all-conference runner, three-time all-regional runner, and three-time academic all-Ohioan. So congratulations, Nick. At this time, I'm going to bring up all members of the girls' state qualifying cross-country team. Hannah Burke, Ashley Cooper, Savannah Dennison, Ava Nelson. Savannah, do you know that guy? Deanna Ramos. Congratulations. Kate Zepp. And the last member was Riley Yoakum. She was unable to join us. I'd also like to bring up our assistant coaches, Coaches Sarah Parcell and Mark Yoakum. Before they sit down, too, I want to also recognize Savannah Dennison. She had a special season. She was all Greater Cleveland Conference. She won. She was the district champion this year as an individual. She was all regional and all Ohio, the first freshman in Mentor High history to be an all Ohioan. She also now holds the school record in cross country with a time of 17:51. So congratulations. Thank you again, and congratulations, Dahl. Thanks, Bill.
Get over there.
Come on, Kristen. Kristen, we need coach.
Great job.
Oh, good smiles. Well, now that you've sat down, you're excused if you'd like to leave. We'll take 2 minutes. I wanted to wait till you sat down.
Mr. President, members of the board, we have several policies on the agenda for a second reading, and I'm recommending approval of these policies.
So moved.
Any discussion? We good? Please call the,
Oh, who's second?
now discussion. Any? Please call the roll, Mr. Wilson.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President and members of the board, I am recommending approval of agenda items C1 related to certified personnel and C2 through C6, all related to human resource matters.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Thank you. This concludes my portion of tonight's agenda.
Next on the agenda, a legislative report. Mrs. Briner?
Okay.
Oh, did I skip?
Do you want to go back?
Sorry. Bottom of the page. Board of Education report and recommendations. Mr. Wilson?
Yes. From a statutory standpoint, the Mentor Public Library was created as the Mentor Public School District Library System, serving the same communities and has the same service boundaries as the school district. One of the responsibilities of the Board of Education is to appoint the Board of Trustees who serve a 7-year term, and there are 7 people. 1 term expires every year. The board's also responsible for approving the tax budget and the annual operating budget. We're very pleased that Christine Henninger had requested consideration for reappointment for a full term that begins January 1st of this year and runs through December 31st, 2026. As we have done in the past, when a sitting member has expressed an interest in continuing to serve, the board has accepted that request. So I would ask the board take formal action to appoint, and then we'll notify the library and other proper authorities.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll. Mr. Wilson?
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
I'd just like to say how much I appreciate the trustees who oversee our library and the leadership from Cheryl Cronin and the other members of her team. I think our library has never been better, and I appreciate it as a community resource.
I would agree.
The next item is the Citizens Financial Advisory Committee was formed back in 2004 and is an official Board of Education committee comprised of citizen members and observers and ad hoc committee members. Once again, the board's past practice has been that if sitting members request an opportunity to continue to serve, that we honor that request. We're very pleased that 2 of our sitting board members have asked to continue to serve. The first is Aaron Medved, who's out in the audience here tonight, that will serve for a term that expires December 31st, 2022. And the second is Janet Malt for a term that will also expire December 31st, 2022. They both have been very regular attendees with doing a lot of their homework and have been very effective in fulfilling the committee's responsibilities. So we're pleased that they've expressed the interest and would ask that you formally reappoint both.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll. Mr. Wilson?
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes. Now, Mary, you're on.
All right,
Sorry.
legislative report. Governor Mike DeWine reaffirmed his position on academic distress commissions, or ADC. In a recent interview with the Youngstown Vindicator, Governor DeWine commented on the House's vote to repeal ADCs in House Bill 154, stating, "I don't think we should be in a situation where we could get rid of the current law without something to replace it. The idea of nothing when there are problems is not acceptable." Referring to the Senate's efforts to revise HB 154, he added, "The state has some responsibility to make sure these children have a quality education." Meanwhile, Senator Peggy Lehner of Kettering indicated her hope to approve the Senate's changes to House Bill 154 after several months of delays. She recently traveled to Massachusetts to learn the turnaround efforts implemented by the Bay State. She told Gongwer News in a recent interview its methods were novel, and she was hopeful the Senate would approve the measure by mid-November. Currently, no hearings are scheduled for the legislation. The recent November elections in Ohio, voters approved 113 of 154 public school district tax issues. 73% of the school tax issues on the ballot passed. That was a slight increase from last year's general election. Voters also approved 121 of 175 school tax issues. That was a passage rate of 69%. 35 of 72 new school tax issues were approved. That was a passage rate of 49%. Also, a slight increase from last year's general election when 46% of new tax issues passed. Voters approved 78 of 82 renewal tax, school tax issues, and that was a 95% passage rate. That was a slight decrease from the previous year's general election, where voters approved 96% of the renewal issues. A new reporting requirement for school districts is due this month to the Ohio Department of Education. This is sponsored by Senator Matt Huffman of Lima. Senate Bill 216 of the 132nd General Assembly created the new report, which was intended to consolidate individual reports into a single report that must be produced only once each year. Information in the report would include training on the use of physical restraint or seclusion, training on harassment, intimidation, or bullying, training on cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and an automated external defibrillator, compliance with nutritional standards, screening for hearing, vision, speech, and communications, health or medical problems, and any developmental disorders, and inter-district or inter-district open enrollment policies. Districts must submit their report to ODE by November 30th. Recently introduced legislation, House Bill 360, introduced by Reps. Erica Crawley, Democrat of Columbus, and Brett Hudson Hillier, Republican of Yorksville, to require the installation of water bottle filling stations and drinking fountains in new school buildings that are constructed with assistance from Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. House Bill 367, introduced by Reps. Jessica E. Miranda, Democrat of Winton Woods, and Susan Manchester, Republican of Waynesfield, to require the state to recommend a job description for school counselors, require public schools to consider those recommendations when preparing job descriptions and assigning duties for school counselors, and require the designation of a school counselor liaison at the ODE. House Bill 369, introduced by Reps. Hillier, Republican of Yorksville, and Michael J. Skindell, Democrat of Lakewood, to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. House Bill 370 was introduced by Reps. Hillier and Brian Baldridge, Republican of Winchester, to allow the Ohio Attorney General to defend school districts, among others, in actions brought against them for maintaining a historical symbol or monument on public property as violating the United States or Ohio Constitution's guarantee of the free exercise of religion. House Bill 375 was introduced by Rep. Richard D. Brown, Democrat of Canal Winchester, to permit a refundable income tax credit equal to the amount of an extracurricular activity fee paid by or on behalf of a low-income public school student. House Bill 398, introduced by Reps. Crawley, Democrat of Columbus, and Bride Rose Sweeney, Democrat of Cleveland, to establish the day of each November general election as a legal holiday and provides paid leave to public school employees and other government employees for that day. House Bill 405, introduced by Rep. J. Kyle Kohler, Republican of Springfield, to modify student attendance requirements at certain e-schools. Senate Bill 216, introduced by Senator Christina D. Rogner, Republican of Hudson, to allow school districts to exempt recipients of the existing homestead exemption from additional taxes imposed by the school district. Senate Bill 218, introduced by Senator Sandra R. Williams, Democrat of Cleveland, to prohibit public schools from beginning the school day earlier than 8:30 a.m. Senate Bill 219, introduced by Senator Williams, Democrat of Cleveland, to require the development and administration of a state career pathways apprentice program for high school students. Senate Bill 224, introduced by Senator Cecil Thomas, Democrat of Cincinnati, to provide additional school funding payments to Warrensville Heights City and St. Bernard Elmwood Place City. Senate Bill 225, introduced by Senator Peggy Lehner, Republican of Kettering, to require public schools to post signs that contain a toll-free telephone number that receives reports of child abuse or neglect. And that was all in this month's report. Anyone have anything to add or any questions?
I would just like to add that tomorrow there's an additional hearing on House Bill 305, the so-called Cup-Patterson school funding, fair school funding proposal. There is growing momentum to have the legislation approved in the House and moved to the Senate, and there's already senators indicating support for that. So we're encouraged by that possibility, and it looks like something could happen late winter or early spring, sooner than anticipated.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, a question regarding Sweeney's, establishing a day off for, does that mean one less day of education for the students? Or are they going to add an additional day at the end of the year?
Oh, Dan.
We're going to lose a day, do you know?
I don't know what the intention would be, but the days or schools measured in the hours now. So as long as schools still reach the minimum number of hours, they could potentially lose that day, and most would be probably still very much in compliance.
Okay, okay.
Good question.
And,
It's interesting, too, it also includes government employees. They're certainly not going to add 15 minutes per day across the year. So who is this going to benefit?
Are any of our
We already found
buildings-
people don't vote. Isn't that going to make any more voters?
Well, I think that's what their goal is, that they would make it easier for people to vote. Are any of our buildings being currently still used for a polling place?
Garfield was used.
Yes. Garfield and Lake Elementary were used this year.
Okay, but Garfield doesn't have any students, so that wouldn't be as,
Temporarily, they're housing students from the CARES program.
oh, the CARES program kids, okay.
But we had security at both sites and
I
were
knew
able to make
Lake
it work.
was going on. Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you, Mrs. Briner. Mr. Wilson?
Yes. Recommend the Board of Education approve agenda items 7A through 7F as presented in the board materials distributed last Friday.
So moved.
Second?
Please call the roll. Mr. Wilson?
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
That completes my report this evening.
Thank you. Any unfinished business to cover? New business? None? Hearing of the public? Any item? Nope. Hearing none. We will be going into executive session. Discussion of employee negotiations and discuss the sale of real estate. We don't intend to have a vote when we come back in, so you're free to leave if you like. You just want to sit and you're more than welcome.
Need a motion and second, please.
And we need a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Mary, then Dean.
Mrs. Briner?
Yes.
Mrs. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley?
Yes.
Ms. Jisling?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes, thank you.